Welcome to Why Is This Good? A podcast by the Naples Writers Workshop. I'm Christine and I'm here with John. Hey, John.
Hello.
All right, John, it's your turn. Tell us about your story.
The story I picked is called Babylon Revisited by F. Scott Fitzgerald. He was 35 and good to look at. The Irish mobility of his face was sobered by a deep wrinkle between his eyes. As he rang his brother-in-law's bell in the Rue Palatine, the wrinkle deepened till it pulled down his brows. He felt a cramping sensation in his belly. From behind the maid who opened the door darted a lovely little girl of 9 who shrieked, "Daddy!" and flew up, struggling like a fish, into his arms. She pulled his head around by one ear and set her cheek against his. "My old pie," he said. "Oh, daddy, 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 dads, 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 dads." She drew him into the salon where the family waited, a boy and a girl his daughter's age, his sister-in-law and her husband. He greeted Marian with his voice pitched carefully to avoid either feigned enthusiasm or dislike, but her response was more frankly tepid, though she minimized her expression of unalterable mistrust by directing her regard toward his child. The two men clasped hands in a friendly way, and Lincoln Peters rested his for a moment on Charlie's shoulder. The room was warm and comfortably American. The three children moved intimately about, playing through the yellow oblongs that led to other rooms. The cheer of 6 o'clock spoke in the eager smacks of the fire and the sounds of French activity in the kitchen. But Charlie did not relax. His heart sat up rigidly in his body, and he drew confidence from his daughter, who from time to time came close to him, holding in her arms the doll he had brought. "Really extremely well," he declared in answer to Lincoln's question. "There's a lot of business there that isn't moving at all, but we're doing better than ever. In fact, damn well. I'm bringing my sister over from America next month to keep house for me. My income last year was bigger than it was when I had money. You see, the checks." His boasting was for a specific purpose, but after a moment, seeing a faint restiveness in Lincoln's eye, he changed the subject. "Those are fine children of yours, well brought up, good manners. We think Honoria is a great little girl, too." Marian Peters came back from the kitchen. She was a tall woman with worried eyes who had once possessed a fresh American loveliness. Charlie had never been sensitive to it and was always surprised when people spoke of how pretty she had been. From the first there had been an instinctive antipathy between them. "Well, how do you find Honoria?" she asked. "Wonderful. I was astonished how much she's grown in 10 months. All the children are looking well. We haven't had a doctor for a year. How do you like being back in Paris? It seems funny to see so few Americans around." "I'm delighted," Marian said vehemently. "Now at least you can go into a store without their assuming you're a millionaire. We've suffered like everybody, but on the whole it's a good deal pleasanter." "But it was nice while it lasted," Charlie said. "We were sort of royalty, almost infallible, with a sort of magic around us. In the bar this afternoon," he stumbled, seeing his mistake, "there wasn't a man I knew." She looked keenly at him. "I should think you'd have had enough of bars." "I only stayed a minute. I take one drink every afternoon and no more." "Don't you want a cocktail before dinner?" Lincoln asked. "I take only one drink every afternoon, and I've had that." "I hope you keep to it," said Marian. Her dislike was evident in the coldness with which she spoke, but Charlie only smiled. He had larger plans. Her very aggressiveness gave him an advantage, and he knew enough to wait. He wanted them to initiate the discussion of what they knew had brought him to Paris.
Had you read this before?
I had not read this before. I don't even remember where it was. I think I might remember, but it's very vague. It was a long time ago, and I read somebody, I think it might have been somebody's Substack or something like that. And they were talking about writing, and they mentioned, kind of as an aside, that this was their favorite F. Scott Fitzgerald story. I remember when we brought the other one, I mentioned that I was having trouble picking an F. Scott Fitzgerald story.
Wasn't it Benjamin Button?
That's the one, yeah, you picked that one, and
Yeah,
I was like,
because
oh,
I was
thank
on the
you.
movie kick. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, thank you, because now I don't have to pick one. Because every anthology has a different one. There's like no like if you look up Nabokov stories, there's like one or two that everyone says these are the best stories. If you look up
Right.
like whoever, and they're like these are the best of all of his stories. But Fitzgerald just doesn't have that best story that we can just go to right away. So I was
Right.
like, okay, if somebody is recommending this, let me give it a shot. And then I had it open as a tab on my computer for like months. I finally was like, all right, we're just gonna do this one.
Yeah. Okay, so you hadn't read it, but I was just looking up his list of works, and he doesn't have a ton of like short stories or anything. This is like one of a few. And then everybody is, of course, like familiar with Great Gatsby.
Yeah, I mean, that's his fame,
Yeah.
which was posthumous.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it didn't sell in his lifetime. He was like, then it
Okay,
took off
okay.
afterward.
Yeah, that's what's gonna happen to me, I'm sure of it. That's why it hasn't panned out. Well, I was really into this. I thought this was great.
That's a good story.
Yeah, I made a comment really early on in the piece when I was trying to get my bearings and trying to figure out what this was about, where there's a scene, where she's like, "Oh, Dad, hey." And he's like saying hi to the adults and there's other kids there. And then he like goes back out into the night. And I like made a comment. I was like, "Must be nice being a deadbeat dad." And he's having all of these like kind of sad thoughts, right? He's like looking around the city like, I'm like, it must be nice to just be thinking about how great this city used to be and to have just like the space and time to feel melancholy when really like as a dad you'd be feeling all kinds of different emotions, which would be like, I have to get the kid to bed, I have to feed the kid. You wouldn't have like time or energy to like feel anything big and outside of yourself, really. It would feel all sort of like immediate. So I made this comment. I was like, oh, must be nice. I thought we were going to read something like that one story that you brought forever ago. It was like something about like the woman and the little dog or whatever, where the guy's having an
Oh,
affair.
Chekhov. Or we talked about Joyce Carol Oates' rewrite of the Chekhov story, the lady and the
Yeah.
little and her pet dog. Yeah.
Is that the one I'm thinking of where like the
Yes.
guy's having an affair with this woman and all of his thoughts are like so self-important and they're so he's got blinders onto his own personal problem. And for a second I thought we were going to read one of those where this guy is like all consumed with it's almost like a Hemingway disease. Only I can feel this
Yeah.
way. Only I am thinking these big grandiose thoughts and interpreting Paris this way or whatever. So I was like pleasantly surprised when I finally started piecing this together and realized that this is a man that was recovering from an era like that in his life where he didn't even have time then to think these grandiose thoughts. He was drunk.
Yeah.
But now he's like paying the consequence, right? Like his wife has died and his kid's been taken away because he spent the roaring 20s getting trashed all the time with like these friends of his. And now everything's like crumbled and he's got to like atone, but he's got this sister-in-law that just wants nothing to do with it. I thought it was wonderful. And then there's all these little lines and I could read a million of them. One being one that you read where it talks about like the corner of his mouth or whatever, or his eyebrow. Like all these just like really literary ways to describe the emotions playing on people's faces or the dynamic at play in between dialogue. I think that's kind of lost these days. I think a lot of times when we think about like show versus tell or whatever, we think like, well, if somebody shouts something, then we'll know that they're angry. There's always more than angry. I saw an interview the other day where a guy on a reality TV show was like, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm frustrated. I was like, oh, Jesus. Like, you learned vocab words when you were in third grade. There's more than mad, sad, and frustrated. When a character yells, there's so much more at play. And that's what I felt like was so rich in these like dialogue scenes between the three adults, where our main character, our dad, is saying things like he's being very measured and intentional and he's trying to stay calm. And so he'll deliver a line, but then we also get to be in his head for a moment to see the strategy that's going on behind the scenes. I love stories like that. That's what fiction can do. If this was on a screen, we wouldn't get that internal thought. We would have to read into what it is we thought he was trying to do. And sure, it would come across.
Good actor might be able to pull that off. Yeah.
Yeah,
But you would miss stuff because
right.
a lot of like even that moment in what I read when he is talking about how he did something at the bar and halfway through describing the bar, he's like, oh crap, I shouldn't mention going to a bar to Marion because she's going
Yeah,
to judge me for it. And we don't yet quite get the stakes of that judgment that
right,
the whole purpose of like getting my daughter back from her rests in her. And I have to, but
right.
we know that he's like, oh, he's on edge around her. But that's like such a subtle undertone to things. Like in film, you'd have to figure out a different way to present that. But here is part of the subtext, right? That's really easy to see. If that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is the section that you read, but like after Marion says like, "Oh, daddy, daddy, daddy."
Daddy, 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 dads, dads, dads,
Dad, dad, dad,
dads.
dad, dad. He greeted Marion with his voice pitched carefully to avoid either feigned enthusiasm or dislike, but her response was more frankly tepid, though she minimized her expression of unalterable mistrust by directing her regard toward his child. So, like, I put all these checks right there because I know exactly what's happening here.
Yep.
He's just watching his tone of voice because he knows this first introduction is fraught. And
Yeah.
he's reading hers because he knows that, like, she can't even stand to look at him. She's got to look at the kid and be like, oh, Marion, you know what I mean? I feel like I've done this a million times. Like, you don't like someone you're interacting with, so you both comment on the dog, right? Like,
That's
you
right.
can't look at this person, so you find something else to look at. One time I had to write a screenplay for like a contest, and someone who edited was like, you're doing way too much with the stage notes. And that's when I knew I should be writing fiction, right? Because here it
Yeah.
would be like the dad looks at the child, Marion looks at the child. But really, what's going on is they're redirecting. They're so uncomfortable. And I enjoy so much more reading this version of it than like seeing it kind of dumbed down.
I think like in a screenplay, you'd probably like at the beginning of the scene, you'd say like Marion doesn't want to see him. Marion
Right,
doesn't like him, but she's
right,
being cordial. He's
right.
trying to figure out a way to impress her. And like that informs everything that comes out. And you let the actors kind
Yes.
of like embody that.
Interpret. Yeah, and that's the other thing I didn't like as a writer. I was like, no, 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 no. All these idiot readers are going to interpret it a million different ways. Like, I want to leave as little room for interpretation as possible.
Yeah, I want to be explicit and specific.
Yeah.
But that's the thing in film, you get all that from the outside. You have to like
Yeah.
read the expression. You have to, whereas here we can dip into his like his motives. Like it's not spelled out immediately. Like he thought to himself, oh my goodness, I need to impress her with how my life has changed and how stable I am now.
Right.
He was careful with the tone of his voice.
Yeah. And I think you're supposed to wonder the whole story, but I certainly was going back and forth the whole time. Like, is he playing that part of the measured father? Is he secretly still a drunk? But I think by the end, we're supposed to conclude that he really has changed.
And we know that because we get inside his thoughts. We get like
Right.
how he reacts to that other couple that showed up.
Right. That's a really good point because all of the things that happen at face value from Marion's lens are not indicative of any real change. Just
Yeah.
because he turns his friend away for a drink in one moment doesn't mean that he's not going to go meet them at the bar 20 minutes later. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that when he's home by himself, he's not taking that second and third drink of the day. Right now, he's like, I have one drink a day. And Marion's like, yeah, I'm sure. Which is interesting because those are the kind of things early on in the story where, as a reader, you're like, okay, I don't know yet. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's when we hear in his thoughts what he's thinking about this other couple. So it's like a couple that he and his wife used to party with. And then like part of the reason why he like hates them is I think he was with them the night that he like had this big falling out with his wife where like they had whatever argument and then he locked her out of the house. And that's what the sister heard about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he hates this couple because he associates them with like one of the worst nights that they had. And then like when he sees them now and they're still drunk and not just drunk, but like in the section you read, like the woman's not even pretty anymore. Or maybe it was Marion they were describing, like the fresh American
Marion,
look.
yeah.
Yeah, there's similar descriptions for this other couple where he's like, I remember like wanting to be around this chick that we hung out with because she was like exciting
Oh,
and
yeah.
fun. And now I'm looking at her like, oh God.
Part of it is she's still that person. Like she's still like trying to be what they were in the 20s. But
Yeah.
now he's like, it's a different world. And everything he's going through is like, Paris is just not the same anymore. These people are trying to recapture that or hold on to that. But you got to face reality here.
Right. And even if the reality is not that you're getting older and you shouldn't be drinking, the reality for our main character and a lot of other people is the fact that they went broke. Like there's not a way to do it anymore. And his wife's dead.
Yeah, his wife died. He lost all his money. He went to a mental hospital, a sanatorium.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
This is why Marion has his daughter in the first place, because
Yeah.
he was in the hospital when she died. And so they're like, what do we do with the kid? And
Right.
the aunt took her. There's a lot at play in here. It's great.
There is, and I think the strongest point so far that you've made is the fact that like we wouldn't be able to believe this change in him were we not seeing it in his head.
Yeah.
And there's like a head hopping moment though, where we get in Marion's head, which like we did in the section that I read, like Marion like redirects her attention to the kid. It's a little bit of like maybe we get to know that because the narrator's like omniscient.
I mean, she looked at the kid. That's just a description of where her eyes are pointed. It's not necessarily inside her head.
No, this one though, Marion shuddered suddenly. Part of her saw that Charlie's feet were planted on the earth now, and her own maternal feelings recognized the naturalness of his desire, but she had lived for a long time with a prejudice founded on a curious disbelief in her sister's happiness, and which, in the shock of one terrible night, had turned to hatred for him. It had all happened at a point in her life when the discouragement of ill health and adverse circumstances made it necessary for her to believe in tangible villainy and a tangible villain. That could very much be like Charlie's interpretation of her.
Yeah, that's how I read it. This is Charlie's thoughts about her. Because that's when he's like, I'm not getting anywhere with this.
Yeah. It also just feels like if it's not like technically in her head or technically like head hopping, it's maybe just another then example of why I like this style of writing that lets us get really into the nitty gritty of like a motivation outside of dialogue.
One thing we should mention on this writing podcast is we talk about point of views so much. And as writers, go to the workshop, all the conversations about point of view. And that's one thing that I think it's a thing that as a writer you can learn pretty easily.
Yeah.
And then you can yell at other writers for breaking that rule. And readers don't care.
No.
And I think that it can't be disjointed or jarring because a reader will, if a reader gets confused, then they're going to care. But
Right.
they won't necessarily notice that they are confused because the point of view shifted.
Yeah.
But they'll notice that they're just disconnected in some way. They're like, well, something happened on this page and I don't know what it was, but now I don't like this story as much. But
Right.
these kinds of things that are just those like subtle nuances, they're going to breeze right past it. And they're getting a glimpse, whether or not they ascribe the idea to Charlie's kind of like own thoughts about Marion, or they ascribe it to Marion's thoughts about herself. Doesn't really matter. It's something about Marion in that moment. And they get to understand what she's doing, how she's feeling, like what she looks like.
Yeah.
At the very least, she looks like this is what's going through her head. At the most, this is what's going through her head. So that's like what's happening in the scene. And they'll breeze right past and not care. And so a lot of times I think when we give advice in the workshop, it's like, oh, don't head hop. Oh, make sure
Yeah.
you maintain your point of view. Or like this sentence is slightly out of point of view. Don't write it like that. We're doing it as we're like they were focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That has nothing to do with this story. I just like that's a thing we should probably say at some point.
No, I mean, it makes sense. Like, I made note of this paragraph in particular because I felt like it was not something that Marion had expressed, maybe to anyone else. And it was like her sort of like shifting and recognizing that this dad wanted something that she understands why, she's a mother. She's
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm seeing that he really wants this kid because it's his kid, not because he wants to prove something, not because he wants to spite me, but because like he can't help but want to raise his own child the way I want to raise mine. And you're right. It could very much just be his interpretation of like what she's seeing.
Well, I don't think you're wrong.
No, I
But
know what
I
you
just
mean
didn't read
though.
it that way. And I
Yeah.
think maybe the reason I didn't read it that way is because it feels almost like, and this is kind of a stretch, but maybe when you say Marion shuddered suddenly, like that's a third person thing.
Yeah.
And then what follows is kind of like it serves as an explanation of the shudder, right? It's like, what
Yeah.
does that shudder mean? And it is describing what's going through her head. But in my mind, because the shudder was seen externally by Charlie, I probably just ascribed the explanation to Charlie as well. Whereas when you're reading, you ascribed it to her as like an internal motivation for the shudder or something like that. And that's just like you flip a coin when you're reading and it's like, which way does
Yeah.
your attribution go?
Right. Yeah, I get it.
Maybe. I don't know. That's a
Well,
guess.
no, I think you're right because like in this same passage, like a paragraph later, it says an electric current of agony surged through him, Charlie, our dad. For a moment, he was almost on his feet, an unuttered echoing in his throat. He hung on to himself for a moment, another moment. Like that's very clearly
That's very clearly.
what's he's feeling internally that only we can know because we're
He's
with
making
him.
internal choices, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like taking actions inside of himself.
Yeah, we're not just interpreting his actions. And then, like, a couple paragraphs later, we kind of switch to Marion. And still, to your point, it can be interpreted as what Charlie is seeing her do, even though it feels like if it were accurate, we could easily, like you said, flip the coin and attribute it to what she is experiencing. It says, then in the flatness that followed her outburst, she saw him plainly, and she knew he had somehow arrived at control over the situation. Glancing at her husband, she found no help from him, and as abruptly as if it were a matter of no importance, she threw up the sponge. Do what you like, she cried, springing up from her chair. Threw up the sponge.
Must be some 30s phrase.
Yeah, give up the ghost. Yeah, so that I feel like now that we're talking about this, I get how the interpretation is still very much that like we're in Charlie's head throughout this, even if we're getting like really good descriptions of how he's interpreting.
I always think back to that one of the early episodes we did with the Telltale Heart, and it's in the first person, and it's from the point of view of the murderer, but he's looking at the guy, right? He's like hiding in the dark, and he's watching the guy's eyes, and then suddenly he starts attributing. He's like, I forget the exact phrasing, but we talked about it in that episode. It was something like, he did not seem to see me, and then all of a sudden it's, he did see me, and like the murderer is projecting into the other guy's, this is what he's thinking right now, and he's kind of telling us that as the narrator as if it's true.
Right.
And it's like in that one, it's a slow kind of like move into the other point of view. So suddenly it's not quite first person, it's kind of third person because he's now the narrator telling us what somebody else is feeling, even though he's interpreting that. Whereas I think this is kind of similar in that way. It's like we're seeing it from third person. It's talking about Charlie, but then the narrator kind of like vision of the story kind of like is leaning more towards Marion here and there. It's like, all right, just for a moment, we're going to like look over Marion's shoulder and see the room from her point of view.
Right.
And I'll even tell you a little bit what's going on inside of her.
Yeah.
But it's so important for the scene, and it works. It's necessary. It's not like it's broken some like rule that's going to make readers throw the story across the room in disgust, right?
Yeah. And I'd have to read like Great Gatsby again, but from what I like remember from high school, this feels like a common sort of stylistic thing for him where like a lot of it is just in the character's head. A lot of it's just like so and so said this, but let's spend even more time on why he said it and how he said it that way. What's that guy's name?
Which one? Gatsby, Jay Gatsby or Nick
Yeah.
Carraway? Is it Carraway?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Gatsby was in first person too, so it'd be interesting to
Is
look
it?
at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's Nick's point of view. He's telling the story of Gatsby.
Okay.
It's like
You're
one of
right.
those, like, I bring out that as an example all the time. It's like, oh, here's an example of a narrator not being the main character,
Right,
not
right,
being the
right.
protagonist,
Yeah, but it's somehow like,
but it's still the narrator's story. It's still about the
yeah,
narrator.
because he's fucking obsessed with Gatsby.
Yeah, Gatsby's obsessed with Daisy, and then Nick is obsessed with Gatsby.
Yeah, I feel like I'm sure there are like a million ways to modernize that story that are just as authentic. Like, a character looking in on a world he wants to be part of, and instead of being part of it, he'll just understand it so fully that you're like, chill out, stalker dude.
Gets to see the underbelly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, the other thing I guess I wanted to talk about for this one was I didn't love the ending because it's kind of left up in the air.
It's like you don't get your kid maybe in 6 months, and then he's like,
Yeah.
ugh, that sucks.
So like the way we leave it though is like when he sees the daughter most recently, the night that his friends burst into the house and make this scene, they've told the daughter that she gets to go back
Yes.
with her dad. And the girl is like smart enough to know that we're not going to discuss this outright, but she like whispers to her dad like when? And he's like soon. And she's stoked and she runs away to go play with her cousins. And that's
Yeah.
kind of it. And then his friends burst in and they're like, "Come drink with us. Why don't you give us your address? We found you." And they're trashed. And he like orders them out and it's this whole thing. And then when he finally goes to leave or comes back, whenever it is, Lincoln, the brother-in-law, is like, "Hey, just so you know, that was really stressful for my wife. She now needs 6 months to decompress," which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a little unreasonable. It's like she was looking for any excuse.
Yeah, but 6 months is just like a wild like amount of time, and it's like this is at the point where like the scene that I just read, she's already lost control of the situation. She understands that it's hard to continue to deny Charlie access to his kid, and so she's like, "All right, fine, I guess I have to do this, even though I absolutely hate it." But then
Yeah.
this is like this last ditch opportunity for her to make a big fuss and dig her heels in a little bit, and so she does. But I didn't feel like Charlie had as strong a reaction to the 6 month delay as much as he did like the fact that his friends burst in or whatever. Which I get why one would be more upsetting than the other.
Yeah, I mean, by the time once the friends, that was the moment in which the decision was going to be made. And after that, it was just playing it out. And so I think he knew in the moment that this was a bad thing. But after that, he's just kind of resigned to it. He knows he can't act out because that'll just make it worse.
Yeah.
But I thought the ending was more like after that, when he's like, despite everything that happened, I confirmed with myself that this is what I really want.
Yeah,
And I
good
think
point.
my wife would have wanted it too. And I got a glimpse of what I lost in the 20s. I got a glimpse of what Paris used to be and that craziness and everything. And I don't want it. I want my
Right.
daughter. And that's like as satisfying an ending as you can hope for in this like bleak situation.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's not as if I, to be clear, like expected him to get his daughter back and for that to be the ending because I hate happy
Oh
endings.
yeah. That's right. No, there's got to be some turmoil in there.
I mean, like, this would just not be as satisfying if it was like, and then him and his daughter, they go and, he has to learn how to make pancakes.
That's right.
I don't want to see him fumble through fatherhood because that's the other thing I hated about this. He's like, "Don't worry, I want my daughter back. I'm hiring this person and this person to take care of her while I wander the streets feeling melancholy about Paris." Like, come on, dude. He's still not going to like be fully the father figure we would expect in 2025, right? He's still outsourcing. So I didn't necessarily want to see her in her new bedroom, like talking to her dad at 5 p.m. when he gets home. But like, I think maybe what would have done it if this was in the writing workshop, if F. Scott Fitzgerald came to us and said, "Please, please help me improve my work," I'd be like, "Listen, F, maybe for this to land for me, I want to watch him process this for one more page. And maybe the conclusion is the same, but he just, in my opinion, he so readily accepted the defeat. And to your point, like, it was really probably the outburst with the friends that that did him in, he kind of knew like
Yeah.
this is not good. But he just says like, I see. And then he went back to his table and then he tells the waiter like, I don't want anything else to drink. I'm good. And then he just has that last paragraph where it's like,
He's gonna come back. He's coming
yeah.
back.
I don't know. I kind of wanted to like experience this a little more. And like, I really like as much as like Helen is part of the reason why the sister is upset with Charlie, I didn't feel like she was a character on the page very much. She's just like a metaphor almost, She didn't feel like a real full character for me. It was just like you could very easily point to her and be like, she's like dead. She's a martyr. I screwed up. And that's all she kind of was. And then at the end, it's like he was absolutely sure Helen wouldn't have wanted him to be so alone. I'm like, I don't know what Helen would have wanted. All I knew about her is that she was drunk with you and then you were mean to her and then she died. I don't know anything about her motivations other than she was like your fun time accomplice wife for a while. And that felt like an easy thing for Charlie to say. And the only thing in this whole story where I questioned his interpretation of what was going on. Because for the first third of the story, like I said, I'm trying to get a grasp of whether or not he has actually changed. And then at the end, we get this line where he's like, well, whatever it is, even if his wife hated his guts or blamed him for her own death or downfall or whatever, she definitely didn't want him to be punished. I'm like, what? You haven't said a fond thing about your wife. All you've said is that you've atoned and you're changed. But you haven't even like really apologized to Marion. You're just like trying to like cow to her, He's just kind of trying to be quiet and calm and collected versus like trite. I don't know. I didn't like that. I didn't like how the wife was like kind of used at the end. It didn't feel like his interpretation. He's like, all I know is that even the person I was meanest to wouldn't want this for me.
I mean, she's dead, so she doesn't get a say. Like,
Right.
that's just him.
Right. I just didn't buy it.
And Marion stands in for her. Marion is like the one who's making the choice. So she definitely doesn't think so. But I'm thinking more about how he acts in that moment. He says,
Right.
okay, I'm not going to have another drink.
Yeah.
They offer me another drink. I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to come back. I'll give her the 6 months. I'm going to do it. So he's making these resolutions.
Yeah.
It's subtle. It is one of those like small, subtle kind of endings. Not
Yeah, it's
like,
just really quiet.
yeah.
Like the ending was not the outburst. The ending was the fallout.
The outburst kind of is the end. I mean, everything follows from it. But the ending of his arc, if you will, for this, because the beginning is like, oh, he's back in Paris. He's going to go see his daughter. And the ending is, guess I'm leaving without her.
Right.
I mean, he's got to cancel the nanny search. He's got to do all these other things.
I mean, that said, I'm being very critical about the ending just because I enjoyed this so much that I felt like it was leading to something louder almost. Or, yeah. But no, I thought this was great. And before you said what you did about knowing that the change was authentic because of this like internal stuff that we get to see with Charlie, my takeaway is very much like that as much as you can show in dialogue what a character is thinking, there's also just that power in describing it. If you can do it in a way that adds to what he said. It's like if Charlie were to say, you're being mean to me, Marion, you wouldn't want the following prose to be like, Charlie was angry at Marion because Marion was being mean. Like, no. You don't want to like reiterate what he said, but you can give us a little more insight into what's not being said. And this, I think, like we've talked about a million times, is just like the perfect example of a guy that's trying to hold it together.
Yes.
He's trying to act in a way that is like opposite of his instincts because he knows what's at stake.
He's trying to change his instincts in a certain way.
Yeah, it's like, if you have a meeting with your boss and you knew the meeting was coming because you yelled at your boss for doing something stupid, and now you got to talk to your boss about why you yelled at them without repeating why it is you think your boss is stupid. Like, you're just trying to like hold it in. You're like,
listen, I only said that because you're an idiot.
What I meant by that was you're stupid, and I should have said it more gently. Yeah, my takeaway is just kind of like what I enjoyed most about this is like something that I think we can all take a little more time to do. We all kind of do a version of it. It's rare that it's just dialogue. Like sometimes we do kind of slow down and say why it is someone is saying this, but like there's something about, like we said, someone trying to fight their own instincts that is like very ripe for this kind of like pause and reflect on each line style.
That is such an interesting thing because we read that recently, the J.D. Salinger story, the Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut, and talked about how external all that was. And like all the internal stuff was a subtext. There was no description of like Mary Jane was a little doubtful that her friend was really feeling this, or like Ramona was a little taken aback by her mother's inebriation. It's just like it's nothing inside their head. So we have to like read all of the external things for the subtext of what they say about what's going on inside their heads.
Right.
Whereas in this story, a lot of it is happening with that disconnect between what they say and what's going on in their head. Like he's
Yeah.
trying to hold back things. He's trying to like modulate himself for her benefit. And even she is trying to modulate herself. That's why we get those little glimpses that you were pointing out of what's going on in her head, is because to fully understand the story, we have to understand that she is also doing the same thing. But those are two different ways of approaching the dialogue. It's like one is completely external. He said, she said, no glimpse of what they're thinking
Right.
except for what they say. And this one is he said, she said what she was thinking and he
Right.
realized. And so I think it has to do with where your story is taking place. Is your story taking place in the conflict between how you're presenting yourself and
Right.
what's going on inside? Or is a story taking place in the presentation
Right.
itself? It doesn't really need that. Or are you putting enough in the presentation that you can understand some of that stuff through subtext, which I think even Fitzgerald is doing. He's not laying out everything. There are moments in here where you get things through subtext. Even literally, like in what I read, he says, really extremely well, he declared in answer to Lincoln's question. We never were told what Lincoln's question was. Like,
Right.
that's just like something we have to be like, okay, Lincoln obviously asked a question.
Right.
So that's a little bit of like, he's only presenting certain things, but what he's presenting is where the story is happening. So anyway, that's a good takeaway because you're right. We don't always think about showing how external and internal diverge
Right.
or how they influence one another or how they, what that play looks like.
Right.
And that is sometimes what is most important in the scene for a character.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking about that story about the couple where the power goes out and then
Mm.
they break up. I feel like what's unique in that story is that the characters are sharing these memories. You know, they've had like a break in their relationship basically, and then this power outage forces them to talk to each other because they can't watch Netflix. And ultimately, I think everyone's a little surprised by the ending when the woman says, I want to break up. I don't want to be together. And it's because we don't get to see internally what she's saying versus why she's saying it,
But
you know?
that whole time he is telling us, because it's in his point of view, that he was actually there in the room, right? He
Right.
was there. He knows what happened when the
Miscarried, I
kid,
think.
it was like
Yeah.
miscarried. Yeah. He knew the sex of the baby. She didn't know he knew that. But because we're in his head, we understand that conflict, that
Right.
she doesn't know what he knows. So that when she's like going to leave, she's been looking for an apartment all this time. And he finds all that out. And I think he says like, there's only one thing to say. And like, it was a girl or something, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
she can infer from all that, the whole chain of things that we have already known.
Right.
But we don't need to see anything that's going on in her head because that's not where the story's happening and what he's hiding from her. Which is the whole point of when the power outages, we're going to share secrets, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just there's something like you said, there's something almost it'd be a completely different story if it were told this way. It's
Yeah.
just this is another way to do it that doesn't give anything away. It still
Yeah.
is enjoyable.
That was one thing that I wrote a story a couple of years ago that I realized after a couple of drafts that I needed to be in both characters' heads. Like there were
Yeah.
moments where you got to know what she's thinking, you got to know what he's thinking, because it was like he's interpreting signals from her in one way and she's interpreting what she's signaling in a different way. And like knowing that that's not quite connecting is part of the way that plays out.
Right. So what's your takeaway?
My takeaway is totally different. I was just thinking about this story we didn't even touch on anything, but I was thinking about the story. It's like, it just all happened in like a couple of days,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it felt like a moment. It felt like
Yeah.
just like one thing. It was going back to Paris to try to see if I can recover my daughter.
Yeah, it's like a single visit, even if it's a
Yeah.
couple days. Yeah.
And it has no clear resolution. It's like presenting a moment in which this confluence of things come together, where the past and the present, hopes for the future, I guess, also are playing in there. All the mistakes of the past come up, what he wants right now and what he's hoping for the future is coming up. And then, we get to see him reflect on everything and we
Right.
get to see him hope for things and we get to see him work for things for the future. And it's just all like a nexus. That's what's creating this moment. And I just love that idea of a story just being that nexus, that moment.
Yeah.
And like, it doesn't have to resolve. It can just present us with that, where things come together and bang into each other. I was just thinking about it in terms of like a story being that. Like a short story it's not an epic, right? You're not gonna be able to cover years, although some do try.
Right.
But they cover years in a way that make it a moment. Like the dinosaur story that was like 300 words long. It's a
Right.
whole lifetime, but it's still only a moment. So I just thinking about that as a way to think about our stories when we're writing them. It's like, how do I encapsulate this?
Right.
Like Edgar Allan Poe's single effect in and the prose tale.
Okay.
In order to make it a singular thing, you got to like bring it together into a moment.
Yeah, that
I
makes
keep using
sense.
the word moment because it seems to be the best one that describes what I'm thinking of.
Well, like you said, like a short story can't be like an epic that covers everything. But, sometimes when we've tried to define a short story or describe it to folks that feel like they don't understand what it is, it's almost like, well, maybe I'm thinking of our like kind of definition that we've given for like things like flash fiction, where it's like a single note. Like you're going to feel this one feeling. It's like a short story has to like zero in on the one thing you want to accomplish. So maybe like I don't feel like the wife was fully represented, but that's not what the story's about. The story had to pick, and it picked, like you said, this singular moment of the dad going in for this like rescue mission almost. Otherwise, we might start 10 years prior when he's drunk.
The night that
Yeah.
that she died, the night that Helen died could be the focus, or it could be a prelude, or it could be a scene that starts it, but it's not. It's him
Yeah.
walking back into that place.
Yeah, and making this attempt. Yeah, that's probably good advice for folks that are trying to cram too much into a short story. Like,
Maybe so.
some people are like, well, you got to know this in order for this to work. And it's like, sure, sure, sure. But you don't need to know all of it. And you don't need to know all of it at the same like level of importance or priority or even chronologically for it to work. You can just, like you said, start at the moment when the story actually starts and feed the rest of it to us. This is not in flashback, it's just like through dialogue and all that stuff that he'll like revisit it.
We talked similarly about like in that dinosaur story or chicken wing story or the paper menagerie story about encompassing a life by picking moments from it. Like everything that has to do with chicken wings or everything that has to do with
Yeah.
the paper tiger, and like how the arc of that thing within the life kind of encapsulates something.
Right.
And that something is what the story is about. And this is not doing it through the arc spanning through time. It's doing it through a singular moment. So it's like another way to frame the point.
Yeah.
So if the chicken wings are the point, or what they represent are the point of the story, then you write about several moments where chicken wings play a part,
Right.
or several moments where a paper tiger plays a part for
Right.
paper menagerie. Whereas this is like a single moment, which brings in all these other things, but it's only that one moment.
Right. Yeah, you're right. He pulls off that effect here where we don't feel like overwhelmed by all the backstory. He singles in on the moment. And then, like you said, even though it's a couple days, like maybe what makes it feel like a moment is that he's laser focused on what it is he wants us to know and pay attention to.
Yeah.
He's not the kind of narrator that's like spiraling, trying to capture all these other things and tell you all immediately and in real time so you know everything. You're just being taken through, and it feels like purposeful and intentional and start to finish scene.
Like I was a different person back then. I've changed and I want something new.
Maybe that's the other
But
point too, is like it feels like a moment because we're being told at the moment where he gets to demonstrate the change. We didn't see him go through the change. He's already there.
And the memories that come up, even the people, the way they talk to him and what he's like bringing up in the moment. It's like, oh, what happened to so and so? What happened to so and so? It's like, oh, they lost all their money and died or whatever. So it's kind of contrasting like how it used to be with how it is in everything. Like, how did it used to be with Helen? How is it now with Marion? Like, everything is different.
Yeah. Good job, F. All right. Thanks, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, consider joining our Patreon. Your support helps us keep the show running. Find out more at patreon.com/whyisthisgoodpodcast. And for industry news, writing tips, and great short fiction, join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Naples Writers Workshop. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter at napleswritersworkshop.com.